to Message Live. To make sure that you don't miss anything we're doing, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make sure that you turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a thing.
Welcome everybody to Mates on a Mission. I'm Sam Ward and it's great to be with you and great to have with us today Eddie Lyle, the legend that is Eddie Lyle, President of Open Doors UK and Ireland and friend of the Message Trust. Welcome Eddie.
Oh Sam, it's great to see your face. Thank you for having me.
I've been so looking forward to getting a chance to speak to you, to find out a little bit more about you, to hear your heart. So grateful that you've come on to join us today. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Really nice to see you. Been looking forward to it.
That's brilliant. We know you, Eddie, as I'd love to start by just finding out a little bit more about you, to find out about your life. We know you as this prayerful, prophetic advocate for the persecuted church, but tell us a bit about life outside of your ministry. Can you disconnect the two? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm Northern Irish. I come from a wee village called Glenavy beside the Loch Shore, 320 people, 7 pubs, 7 churches, a war memorial and a pigeon loft. And I came to the Lord as a result of a street evangelist meeting me in Antrim town, and he came up to me and said, God's got a wonderful plan for your life. But actually, I think I've got in more trouble as a Christian than I did as a heathen. And so but on that day that I met him, I came home. I'm not at all embarrassed to say this, but I got down on my knees and I said to Jesus, I'm a sinner and my life is a mess. My father was a serving officer with the Royal Air Force. He was away for 6 months. We had a very combative relationship. He was 3rd generation military, command, control, love. We became just loving friends in later life, but during teen years it was pretty difficult. And the war was going on in Ireland. It was a mess. And in Glenavy, there's a church called St. Aidan's where my grandfather, who was a serving officer in the military, was a leader in the church. He's buried along with all of my family. But I stood in front of the altar, and I've no idea why I did this. I was 17. I'm 68 now, and I stood in front of the altar with my hands open, and I prayed the most dangerous prayer that any human being can ever pray, which is, "Hear my Lord, please use me."
Come on.
And I think of how bizarre it is for I'm a little person. I'm a kind of a hobbit, I suppose, but I stood in front of this altar, prayed this prayer, and here I am 50 years later, doing the kind of stuff that I'm doing, meeting heads of state and government people and church leaders and extraordinary people across the face of the earth. And it began in that microcosm. I believe my grandfather prayed for me. That's another story. I've just researched his military history as an act of homage, his medals and picture hang on a wall opposite this computer to remind me of my DNA, which is a very important thing we might get to. Where you come from is really important, I think. But anyway, I discovered in a piece of paper that I found, the archivist helping me find it, that he was one of the founders of Youth for Christ in Ireland. Wow. And I served in the ministry of Youth for Christ for 20 years. He died in my first year, but I think the prayers of our parents and if we're fortunate to have a heritage, the prayers of my forefathers and my mother, who when I was born with a forceps delivery lifted me to heaven and dedicated me to God in my first few breaths.
Come on.
Sometimes life moves too quickly, and I think it's important to slow it down, because birth is important and destiny is important and legacy is important. I'm in the autumn of my ministry now, but But it's important just to think, if for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The most beautiful human being is a human being impregnated with the destiny and power of the Holy Spirit, because those lives matter. Those lives have purpose because Jesus died for them. Wow. I've been married for 36 years to Christine. She's a Scot, I'm Irish. She can get pretty fiery around here. This morning, we're one of the COVID families that have got a little puppy who came a few weeks ago from County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland, a mini schnauzer. So at 7 o'clock, this is too much information. At 7 o'clock this morning, he stole my underpants out of the laundry bin. And I was racing around the house with my clothes on, I would have to say, and Christine giving me instructions as to how to pull my underpants back. But we have a son, Adam, who is coming 30 in February. He's our adopted son. He's been with us for 29 years. He's an adult living with autism, special needs, and just a year ago diagnosed with epilepsy. He lives half a mile away from us. So our hearts are very tender in so many ways. We'll talk in a moment or so about the calling that is on my life and what I've been doing for the last 2 decades. But in this world at this time, I think we need to be a compassionate people, and the journey has been rough and difficult. I've had cancer, we've struggled with infertility, mental health problems in our family. I think the enemy meant some of this stuff to harm us and destroy us and take us out, but God has meant it for good and has just held us and kept us and continues to keep us. But our level of dependency upon him is pretty high. I would say. Wow. Pretty full on.
Thanks so much for sharing it, Eddie. That's just incredibly generous, incredibly vulnerable of you, and I just appreciate it so much. You know what a leader that you're able to share your life and not just your ministry. And thank you for that. And hearing you talk about having a tender heart, and it's not like you've got an easy life and then an easy job, or a difficult life and an easy job. You've also got this incredibly big ministry that you're leading. And every day you'll be getting stories, the most difficult stories of persecution around the world. How do you maintain hope? What does it look like to keep going when each and every day you're bombarded with some of the most harrowing stories?
Well, it's such a penetrating question, Sam. Let me contextualize this first. There's a beauty in the question, but let me put a frame around it first of all. So, stuff going on right now that I find difficult to deal with. So, the deprioritization of Christian medics in Asia that are being put into care wards for COVID patients without PPE because they're Christian causes me a struggle. Mentoring one of our key leaders in Syria right now, and actually his job last week was to buy cylinders of oxygen to give to Christians to try and keep them alive through COVID, because Christians are deprioritized. They are the last in line. Christians presenting themselves in queues for food recognized because of their names are deprioritized and put to the back of the line. And by the time the line comes forward, they're told, well, your God, who you say provides for all of your needs, is going to have to, because we're certainly not. So that's part of the frame of the question. And in a little bit later in the interview, I've got, I hope, some words of encouragement for you. But I think back over 20 years in this world, and then 20 years in the world of Youth for Christ, which is a lovely ministry, which I know that you love too. Once a youth worker, always a youth worker. But I have to say that I see more hope in the persecuted world than I do in the free world. I see the presence of Jesus standing nobly with his people I see leaders that have stayed through the war in Syria because of the fact that Jesus stands with them. You see, sometimes in the Western context, we embroider our faith, and we are the most overeducated generation of Christians that there has ever been, but we have failed to apply the knowledge that we have. It's all here, and it's not worked out. And so, whilst I acknowledge that my brothers and sisters in the persecuted world face challenges so excruciating and so horrendous and so terrible and almost on the surface of it unsurvivable, the fragrance of Jesus is there. It's like looking at the New Testament church in all of its triumph and all of its tragedy at the same time. And as an old man now, I want to say that I would far rather live in the world of reality than fantasy.
Wow.
Some kind of odyssey that is created by intellectuals who sit in their armchairs and pontificate about that which is supposedly wisdom. I would far rather be a servant of Jesus with my glasses on, seeing the world through the eyes of the teachings of the saints and our Lord, than tripping up on some kind of nice new fruit tea and sitting in a coffee bar somewhere pontificating about things. So I see hope. I see hope all the time. Sorry, Sam.
I was just going to then apply that to the church then. So when, often we in the West think that we've got this perfect view of what the church should be like, that we're the best version, church 2.0. But yet when I read the stories of the New Testament and I see the persecution that really formed and grew the church in its infancy, I feel like the persecuted church in our time around the world looks far more like that, the authentic version of the church. Do you feel like we are naively carrying on as the Western church, thinking we're nailing it, thinking we're the best version? I don't know. This gives some insight into that.
Well, I'll humbly try and give some insight into that. I never believed that I was going to have to use my phone to sit down in a restaurant beside the Thames last night to be able to have permission to eat tea with Christine. There's something going on that we didn't see coming. And forgive me, I am going to focus on COVID-19 and its effect upon our world. And please filter very carefully what I'm about to say. Because I don't think big is bad, but I don't think big is the best. And we have this misconception that for things to be successful, they need to be franchised and they need to be big and they need to be networked and they need to be enormous and they need to be branded and all that goes with that. Now, I'm not saying that all of that is bad, but I think that in the Lord's good timing, this scattering of the church and it having to become smaller is actually a call to authenticity. I think in the big thing you can hide, but in the little thing you cannot hide. The small thing which the persecuted church lives in, you don't need to teach the persecuted church anything about isolation. They've been isolated for generations and generations. For them, small is good, small is accountable, small is real, small provokes transparency. Everything that the world runs from, this is an opportunity for, I keep using this word, authenticity. In the public space, in the time of the book of Acts, they ran towards the challenge of wrestling with philosophers and the Greeks and the mystics in order to bring the penetrating laser-like truth of Jesus into that situation. They weren't worried about it. And so therefore, this explosion of thought and loud noise and all of this tearing of cloth that's going on right now, I'm urging my church leaders to celebrate here in Whitney, where I live. I'm part of the leadership team of my local church. We're thrashing about trying to find our purpose. And I'm trying to say, let's celebrate this. This is great. This is an opportunity to become real with each other. Hey, this is an opportunity to do discipleship. We haven't been doing discipleship. Things have been so big, we've forgotten the real thing that we're here to do in the first place. Yeah. So, I want to bring some encouragements at the end of this interview, but it's all to do with discipleship. It's all to do with authenticity. It's getting real.
Oh, I love it. Thanks, Eddie. That's brilliant. Tell us then about the vision for your life, for your ministry. You know, when I think about what the Lord's placed on my heart, a desire for every young person to hear the good news of the gospel or to eradicate poverty in my lifetime. But is that, well, you know, when we think about persecution, when we think about the persecuted church, is there ever an end to it? Is that something that the Lord has placed on your heart? Like, what is the vision?
Okay, well, I've just been working with our leadership team, and we've got this new sparkling vision. Always important to go back and check the vision and the direction and just say, Lord, have we got it quite right? And, you know, if you're interested, write down our vision statement, because I think it's absolutely stunning. So we want to see a strong church defying persecution, standing together and sharing Jesus no matter what the cost. Oh. Now, I know all of you in the message could say yes, yes, yes to that, because you're living it. It's absolutely, but I'm so excited by it. You know, it makes my heart race. I get inspired by it. It makes me want to get out of bed and get stuck in, roll about in it. But this thing about defying that persecution, you know, it's here. I know that, Sam, you know the scriptures better than me, but 2 Timothy 3 says, in fact, anyone who wants to live a holy life will be persecuted. John 15:20, remember the words that I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. Persecution is an authenticator. Yeah. It's the litmus. It's the divine litmus test. You either are for him or you're not for him. If you're for him, you will stand up. If you sit down, you're not for him. And if you stand up for him, there is a cost to it. But it doesn't matter the cost. Because I've just recently been talking to some black leaders that I love, just been walking with them for 5 years. And one of them said to me the other day, you know, he said, you need to live with eternity written in your heart. And when I minister in the world of the persecuted church, they love me to teach about heaven. Sam, when was the last time you preached about heaven?
Wow.
And it's, you know, I don't, you know, I love you. I'm not giving you a hard time here. But for the whole network, when was the last time you preached about heaven? Yeah. Is it true or isn't it true? And I'm just reading this book at the moment called Life Without Lack by the amazing Dallas Willard. You know, everybody put your hand up if you love Dallas Willard. But he says this, one of the greatest needs today is for people to really see and really believe the things that they already profess to see and believe. Knowing about things, knowing what they are, being able to identify them and say them does not mean that we actually believe them. When we truly believe what we profess, we are set to act as if they were true. And acting as if things are true means in turn that we live as if they are so. You know, let me be clear. Where there is patent injustice and evil and darkness, which usually colludes and is the oxygen within why persecution happens, we need to speak against that and to advocate for truth and justice globally. And I'm glad that there is the beginnings of some kind of parliamentary awakening about this issue of religious liberty, but also the persecution of Christians. We are the most persecuted people group on planet Earth by a square 100 miles. So where it's evil, let's name it and shame it and get after it, and to do it with dignity and truth and integrity. But the other dimension is, I don't think persecution will ever come to an end. Only when our beloved, adorable, wonderful Jesus comes back and the trumpet blows and we go to that reality of heaven, that's when it will end. But I'm not here. I don't think the calling that is upon open doors in my life is to end persecution. Our calling is to strengthen that which remains, to give it the nobility, and to bring the family together so that when one part of the body hurts, the whole body hurts.
So how do we then help the Western church understand and connect to that? How do we bring to light the realities of life in persecution and connect it to our very, very comfortable Western lives? We need the church on board with this. We need to feel their pain. Is there anything practical we can do in that?
Oh, well, everyone should be a supporter of Open Doors. Everyone should be familiar with what we do. Yeah. www.opendoorsus.org. Get in there. My sister is in Ireland at the moment, and she's living in a cul-de-sac with 12 families, and 4 of them have got COVID. I cannot get her out of my mind. She's there. I pray for her. I love her. She's part of me. The analogy is perfect with my sister's nurses in Asia that are going into wards without PPE. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? PPE. I can't get them out of my mind. When I take communion, when I go to the altar and I look at the cross that's empty, I remember that my brothers and sisters, very probably on that day, are taking communion too in situations that are absolutely horrible. My plea today is to let our persecuted family into our hearts, be knowledgeable, be aware of the Open Doors World Watch List, the top 50 nations. Pray for some nations and ask God to give you a nation that you can pray into and become knowledgeable about. And let the subversive spirituality of the persecuted church inspire your witness. I've been radicalized. I'm not scared to talk about Jesus to anybody in any place at any time, because that fear has gone. And I think I owe it to my persecuted brothers and sisters for continuing to stoke that fire and passion for running after Jesus.
Love it. That's so helpful. Thank you so much. You said earlier that you might have a word of encouragement for us. Then I would love to receive it. I'm all ears, Eddie.
Okay, well, next week I'm leading a spiritual virtual retreat. Please pray for me. How can you do a virtual spiritual retreat for 40 leaders in Telford? And I'm talking about Psalm 23 or Psalm 23, depending upon where you've been educated. I tell you for why, Sam, because on my bucket list, I fly kites as a hobby. I've got 29 in the garage, and there's something that I love about flying kites. I collected them from all over the world, and it's a kind of my quiet time. I'll fly kites and I grow roses and all of this sort of thing. But on my bucket list, there was, ever since I was a wee boy, I wanted to go and spend a day with a shepherd. And I did that recently, and it was utterly transformative. Sam, there was a moment when I was standing in the field, and this ewe that was great with lamb inside came up, walked up to me and leant against me. And it was like the Lord saying to me, this is what I want you to do with me, just to lean against me. Now, I have just a fragmentary understanding of the world within which some of you minister within the message. I adore what you do. I love Andy and Michelle and Sam. I love you too. I think what God has called you to do, you're like a 21st century Salvation Army. I think it's just wonderful what God has done in you and what will be for the future. But I'm not going to teach in this moment about Psalm 23, but this is from my journal that I wrote on the day after I spent the day with a shepherd. He's been a shepherd for 40 years. And the month before I joined him, his wife died with cancer. And I met him circuitously speaking at a filling station. And when I was praying to the Lord, please, can I go and spend a day with a shepherd? And anyway, the filling station was on his farm. There was a couple of hundred people in the audience, but there was 600 sheep outside. And so I said, please, could I come and spend a day with you? And can I bring a camera and can I capture our story? And this man poured his life into me for the day. It was amazing. But here are just, if you're watching this interview and you can just barely tolerate to listen to more Irish ramblings, take a pencil and just write down a few of these things, because I'm praying that in the Spirit, as I speak these words, that God will give you a revelation, a fresh revelation of the shepherd and the sense of responsibility that he has for you in your calling and followership of him. So this is what I wrote down. He's always watching. He's always on duty. He never eats breakfast until he feeds his sheep, and he has 600 of them in 30 ewes. He's there when they're born. He's the one who drains the amniotic fluids from their nostril and sees their first breath and hears their first bleat. He's the one who wipes them down and sees the mother and gives the newborns the first lick. He actually loves his sheep and is mindful about their every need. He's obsessed with the need for them to be in the right time, in the right place, in the right season in their lives. He's always looking out for those that are limping, so much so that he holds computer files and accurate information about each one of them. He's obsessed that they're healthy and well fed. He has a plan for every sheep. He's totally aware of their fragilities. He's constantly on the look for their health needs. He chases them in order to remove the brambles from their fleece and the grass from between their claws. He's obsessed with the infestation from flies and dirty areas on their bodies, some unmentionable, and he will anoint them with special ointments to preserve them from buzzing flies, particularly who lay eggs that can drive them crazy in the summer months. He knows what makes them happy. He knows how to deal with predators and their enemies, and he transports them carefully from A to B and gives real care to all of their bodily needs, and he will not rush things. Now, my friends,
Wow.
I'm praying today that maybe you'll have a chance to lift that often quoted psalm from the book and just read it. I, in this stage of life, just want to testify to you within the complexity of what is life and the rough and tumble that I live with. At this point in time, I have the most irrational sense of the presence of the shepherd walking with me day to day. I cannot understand it, but what I do know is that I am so deeply, deeply grateful for it. And that is your inheritance. Before you were in your mother's womb, he knew you. And the shepherd loves you, and he's called you, and he has promised to take care of you now and into eternity.
Wow. Wonderful.
Amen.
Wow, Eddie, that is like a one heck of a meal. It's like you laid manna before us. That's so good. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for your time. We've run out of our time together, so I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your heart and all of that great stuff. We will be praying for you, and I'm going to encourage anybody watching to get involved with Open Doors. Do pray for them and support them as best you can. Thanks again, Eddie.
Lovely to talk to you, son.
We hope that you enjoyed the show. Make sure you don't miss out on what's coming up on Message Live. All you need to do is like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click the bell to receive notifications and the latest news of Message Live.